Hey y'all. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. It's not a lesson on any song or anything like that. Something different. I was exchanging some messages with somebody about live Zeppelin. And they were saying, oh, Jimmy Page was such a sloppy live player. Some validity to that. And that they, but went so far as to say they were a pretty lousy band, especially after, 70 or 71. And overrated as a live band, all that stuff. And so, we got to talking, and I said, well, what have you heard of the recordings, the bootlegs and stuff? And he said he's heard a few, and they were all lousy sounding, and wasn't impressed. So I thought, let's walk through one of the better ones, and if you're one of those people that doesn't know a lot about live Zeppelin, or wants to get into it, or just isn't familiar with the stuff, especially the 77 tour, we'll pick one out and talk about it. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to evangelize about live Zeppelin for a little bit. 77, the one we're talking about specifically is, calling them by name is a little bit ridiculous now because bootlegs are just everywhere, and you get them for free and download them, and you can even get them on Amazon now. There's a bunch for sale on Amazon. But anyway, this one is kind of known as "Listen to This, Eddie" is the commonly known title. June 21st, 77, at the LA Forum. So to start with, it's not a soundboard. It's an audience recording. There have been a bunch of 77 soundboards that have come out in recent years. In fact, a long time ago, one of the fact, I think it was the first one I ever heard, was Destroyer, the first bootleg of any band that I ever heard. And that's a soundboard from Cleveland. I think it's 4/27/77. And that's a soundboard that is really raw, and it almost sounds like the monitor mix or something, because there's not much in the way of, you barely hear the audience, you don't hear a lot of the reverb and stuff. It's just an ugly sounding, because Jimmy was just off that night when Destroyer. So if Destroyer was the only one you ever heard, then I could understand how you would say, oh God, what is all the fuss about Jimmy Page? He stunk. That night he did. But, and the 77 tour in general was kind of uneven, but when Jimmy was on, there were some really good shows. So some of them from the soundboard are pretty dire, and even the audience recordings from 77. But this one, 6/21/77, is one to seek out. You can even download the tracks off of YouTube. Any bootleg you ever wanted, you can just download off of YouTube. So anyway, the soundboard recordings, the problem is they tend to sort of show every flaw and every flub, especially from Jimmy. And on the soundboards, Jonesy's bass tends to sound terrible too. But this one is one of the better audience recordings you'll ever hear from any band, and it was done by this guy Mike Millard, who is sort of legendary among us bootleg freaks, because he lived in the LA area. I'm not sure where, but he recorded a bunch of sort of mid-70s shows from the Stones and Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, LA Forum shows in San Diego. He would sort of hop around to the different venues, but ended up, unfortunately, about 25 years ago, took his own life, and probably never really realized what a legend he was and how important he was to rock and roll history. But anyway, this is one of the ones that he did, and what he would do was, it kind of explains the quality. He would go to the venue in a wheelchair, and underneath, he didn't have any kind of disability. He just got a wheelchair and pretended, and he would stick the cassette recorder sort of underneath the seat part. No one ever checked or searched or anything. And since he was in a wheelchair, they'd wheel him all the way down to near the front, and he had perfect center seats for most of the shows where he could do his recordings. So anyway, that's the history of this recording. It's a Mike Millard one. In fact, this show is the only little bit of it. The song remains the same. Is the only little bit that Jimmy has seen fit to release officially, because on one of the DVD menus from that DVD set, you hear this recording pasted onto some 8mm footage from '77. Most of that is I think from Birmingham. But the footage is so grainy and far away, you would think that that's the real sound from that film. It's not. But so anyway, so let's get into it. Things to know about the tour itself. It was really more of a Song Remains the Same movie soundtrack tour than a Presence tour, because by the time this tour came around, Presence was almost a year old by then, and Song Remains the Same soundtrack would have been in October, and this tour started April 1st. It was supposed to start in February, but Plant got sick, I think, and the usual delays that Zeppelin always had. But they started in April in the springtime. They were massively popular by then, of course. They did a week at Madison Square Garden, a week at the LA Forum. They did a few days in Chicago. There were some outdoor stadium shows. They did 2 Day on the Green shows in Oakland. So they were big. Did Seattle, Kingdom. They were the biggest thing in the world then, obviously. But there was a little bit of a heavy vibe around that tour, because by that time things had gotten heavy. The drugs had gotten more serious. Security, they were a little bit more paranoid, because they were getting, especially Jimmy was getting all kinds of death threats and weirdos and stuff. So they were surrounded by this mob of heavy people who were, well, Bonzo himself even got involved in it by the time they got to Oakland, and was charged with assault and then beating up one of Bill Graham's assistants and stuff. So it did get a little bit ugly. But nevertheless, they still were able to come up with some great shows, and this is one of them. In terms of the band members, Plant, in recent years he talks about how we were in the fishbowl. He kind of talks bitterly about this period, the last few years of Zeppelin. He acts like I was so aware that things were getting out of control, but you don't hear any evidence of that in the stuff he says from the stage and the interviews he was given at the time. So I don't know what to make of all that. I think he's just sort of kind of distancing himself from stuff that was going on then around the band or in the band. But his voice, Plant's voice, even though he hadn't really recovered physically with his ankle and I think his elbow also got hurt in that car accident in '75, but he was still in fine form vocally. In fact, '75 was probably his worst vocal tour, but by '77 I think he kind of learned how to use his voice the right way, where it wouldn't crack all the time like it did in '75. He was really ill in '75. But he was sounding really good and really strong. He wasn't the Plant who could do the Intro to Immigrant Song and sing the high parts on rock and roll anymore. But as any one of you who has gone past 30, you understand that you're just playing not the same person you were at 30 that you were at 20. So it's natural that some of that would go over the years. But compared to the previous tour, he sounded fantastic. So Plant was in fairly good shape then. Jimmy not so good shape. He was certainly into hard drugs and smack by then, but to me it sounds like a lot of his performances sound more like he's drunk than he's stoned. He was just really hit or miss. But given that it was L.A., the band usually rose to the occasion, and this tour in '77 was no different. Jimmy's guitar tone I like on the '77 tour. I wasn't a big fan of his '75 tone. '73, '72, '71, those are, in my opinion, his best tones for the Les Paul especially. But in '77 it wasn't bad. He had just enough crunch to it. He wasn't obsessed with doing everything on the neck pickup like he was. It seemed like in '75 everything was done. That just sounds awful to me, but that was how he would play in '75. So he was hit or miss, but when he was on, it was a thing to see, especially because he was also more into the performance and the visual of it than the sound of what he was playing. So that he kind of misses some cues and gets things, because you could see in your mind he's jumping around and doing all that stuff. And if you watch on YouTube, there's 8mm footage of the whole production of during that guitar solo when he's doing, he's doing all that stuff with the bow and the laser pyramid. He was performing. You got to hand that to him. No one left disappointed on that front. But it did. I think the playing did suffer a little bit as he got into that. Bonham was obviously a full-blown raging alcoholic by the time '77 came along, and he was kind of plumbing the depths of alcohol abuse on the road to his oblivion. But all in all, he came through virtually every show. You probably have to say he was the high point of the '77 tour, especially this gig, and the one 2 days later is another good example. But he was pretty good. He was right on. Jonesy, I don't know what can you say about him. He was great all the time. The big criticism I have of him on this tour was that really terrible 8-string alembic bass that sounded a little bit jangly. It just made everything sound sloppier than it really was. I hate his bass and his tone and the sound of his playing on the '77 tour. Wish he hadn't done that, but he got that 8-string thing. It was a new gimmick, probably a new toy to try out, and of course had to bring it on the tour. To the detriment, I think. But his playing is outstanding, as it always is. He was always on. He and Bonzo, you can't really fault them. So, is it the best show of the '77 tour? The 6/21/77? Probably it is. You could argue one of their best ever, especially because the set list is so good. The playing isn't what it was in '70, '71, but at least you got the acoustic set. You got a nice taste of what they were doing. And of course it's an LA show, so the vibe was always good there. So you get that real party atmosphere to it. Especially on this recording, you really can hear people are going nuts, and it sounds like a fun show. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the actual show. Song Remains the Same is the opener. And that was a good opener. Not only does it have the sort of introduction and the fanfare of the instrumental section, but it allows Plant to ease into, I had a dream. That the first notes he sings, the first line he sings of the whole show is sort of a crooning, I had a dream, crazy dream. And it doesn't have to do, and do anything crazy right off the bat like he used to do. So he could kind of warm up a little bit, And so it was a wise choice. Plus it's just a really up celebratory kind of tune. It worked well for that. But if anyone ever asks you, what's the big deal about John Bonham? Why is everyone so crazy about how great he was? Listen to this performance of Song Remains the Same, especially right at the tail end of the intro part, at around 1:35, 1:38, right in there. Just listen to about the 10 seconds starting at 1:38. And if anybody ever wants to know what Bonham was about, that little segment there as it goes in, that little fill and drum roll thing that he does, it's hard to describe it. Really sets him apart from any other drummer that I've heard in rock. He was just on another planet from other drummers. Never knew how great he was, and in some ways that probably killed him. But that's what I would point to if anyone wants to know. Some of Jimmy's performances on Song Remains the Same over the years, especially post '75, are really rough, and there's times when he's doing it, and he's doing that stuff, and all you hear is the open string. So it just sounds like this when he's doing the. That's all you hear through all the soloing and stuff. So he was a little bit careless on those sections. This one, however, he kind of nailed it. So I can't really fault him on that for this particular performance. Jonesy, as you'd expect, really suffers from that 8-string bass. It's awful. It's terrible. So the less said about that, the better. They go right into Sick Again, as they did at all the shows in '77. And this one you get one of the rare sort of mistakes that Zeppelin had on stage. Right at the start, they do because it starts with the Rover as the intro, which was really sloppily done by Jimmy in particular. But then when they get into the end of that, what it does at the very start, Jimmy's not there. So Bonham keeps going. Plant sort of tentatively sings the first line. Jonesy stops for a second because he must have seen, what's Jimmy doing? But then Jonesy gets back into it, and then Jimmy joins them at the end of that first vocal line. So I don't know what was going on stage. I don't know if he switched guitars or whatever, or if the cable fell out on his guitar. But they recover quickly and get back into it. But there is a little bit of a goof there. I always thought this Sick Again worked well as a live number, but probably better than the studio version. And this is a good one. It is a good one. So Jimmy would have opened on the 12-string neck for Song Remains the Same, and then gone to, for Sick Again, gone to the 6-string neck. That goes into Nobody's Fault But Mine, one of the only 2 Presence tracks that they did live. And especially since that was a fairly recent album, you would have expected they would have done more. But they didn't. But Jimmy gets off a nice solo. That one, the live one, is a little bit more compact than the studio one. I think they sort of cut these parts in half. Cut that stuff a little bit shorter, so you don't have to wait through all of that before you get to the meat of the song. So that works. Over the Hills and Far Away is next. They didn't play that at all the shows on the 77 tour. Kind of rolled it out as needed. And this one is pretty good. I've always thought it worked well as a live number. Jimmy does his... In fact, if you could take the guitar tracks out of these live versions of Over the Hills and take the multi-track of Jimmy out of the live versions of Immigrant Song, I would bet that the guitar solos are identical every time, or close to identical. So he would do similar licks and soloing in both those. But this is a good version of it. Then it gets to Since I've Been Loving You. I think that one, in my opinion anyway, got worse and worse over the years. The early ones they did, especially 70, 71, are just perfect. And Jimmy was so tight in his playing. But then by you can hear the start of it. By the time it got to Nebworth and the 1980 tour, it was just Cocktail Lounge schlock to me. I don't like the later ones. This is probably the last version that I really kind of enjoy. They had only done it a couple times in 75, and so I think 73 was really the last time it was a regular set feature. Then it came back in 1980 back into the set. You'll hear Jonesy on the piano instead of the organ. That's another thing I don't like. I prefer it with the organ, but they're Led Zeppelin. Who am I to second guess that? They should have just gone, the whole vibe of this, it really is T for One more than Since I've Been Loving You. They should have just done it as T for One. Sing those lyrics over, do those breaks over it, and do another Presence tune. I don't know why they didn't. But nevertheless, this one's okay. It's not bad. No Quarter next. That's probably sort of the highlight of all the 77 shows. They kind of got bloated a little bit, certainly by this point. You can't deny that it's bloated, but still, even though it is, and it goes on too long, and it's way too self-indulgent, especially Jonesy's part, I still like this one. It's one of the few from after 73 that I would listen to all the way through. There are only a handful that I could say that. And this one I kind of like, the long piano section. It's not nearly as boring to me as some other ones. And then the blues jam they get into after the meat of Jonesy's piano solo is really pretty good. So now we have sort of the way that you can hear the way they've constructed the set list, because after No Quarter, that's sort of a break of the first hour. And it seems to me like the 77 shows were broken up into the first hour, second hour, and then whatever was left, So we kind of get, they control the mood pretty well that way, because you go from No Quarter, this really moody thing, and it's not really a rah, rah, rah kind of song. So then you go from there, you go into 10 Years Gone, which continues that sort of vibe of a little bit soft but still intense, that kind of feel to it. The only versions you get of 10 Years Gone live are 77 and Nebworth. I think they might have done it at one of the Copenhagen shows as a warm-up for Nebworth in 79. But it does work pretty well, considering there's a million guitar overdubs on the studio version. The live ones are actually not bad. And for most of the shows in 77, I think he didn't have it for the first few gigs, but he eventually got that 3-neck thing. He was doing it on a 2-neck one, a 2-neck guitar for the early ones, or even on a 12-string Ovation probably. But then you got the 3-neck thing, which he could show off in Spinal Tap fashion. And it actually sounds pretty good. Sometimes Jonesy's strumming and rhythm guitar playing is kind of off from what Jimmy's doing, but all in all, can't complain. The problem with this though is there's a break in this one, probably where Millard was flipping the tape over. So when you hear most versions of Listen to This Eddie, they've patched in another source to make it a complete performance of 10 Years Gone, which is kind of tragic because it really is a good version. It would have been nice to have it in that stellar quality all the way through. Then again, in the wisdom of their set list construction, they get into the acoustic set, which we hadn't heard as a full acoustic set in a few years. Maybe it was they did an Earl's chord and decided, hey, you know, that went over pretty well, we should add that back in. So we get that, and we get Plant's extended intros of the songs throughout this show, really, but when he's introing the acoustic numbers, it's pretty entertaining. In fact, I think a lot of the legend of Robert Plant's plantations, as they called them, from the stage, rest on the 77 tour, because he was just full of himself by that point, in a charming way, mind you. But he just liked to be the MC of the show, basically. So Battle of Evermore, we get Jimmy on mandolin, Jonesy on acoustic, probably 12-string, if I haven't quite listened to it in a while, but Bonzo on tambourine, and Plant was great singing this one at every show in '77, in my opinion. But I don't understand for the life of me how they could think it was a good idea for John Paul Jones to sing Sandy Denny's part. It's laughably embarrassing. It's just, you have to hear it to know what I'm talking about. It's so bad. You know, it doesn't sound any different than I just did it. That's how bad it is. So if you're gonna question Zeppelin, that's one thing to question. In fact, I've heard Jonesy say in recent years, I don't know how I got talked into doing that. He must have heard, you know, I'm sure he's heard the bootlegs by now, and cringed as we all do. But nevertheless, I give him credit for doing Battle of Evermore. Nice to hear it. I mean, if it meant that we had to tolerate that vocal, I'm okay with it. Going to California, another one that I thought always worked well live. Just not much to say about it other than a nice job on that one. Bonzo got to go back and drink another 18 beers during that one. He got a little break. Black Country Woman is sort of just a fragment in '77, the first minute of it or so, leading into Bron-yr-aur Stomp. That one they used to do in '72, '73-ish, right around there in the European shows. I don't know if they did it. I don't think they did it. In fact, I'm sure they didn't do it in America in '73, but they were doing it in Europe, and might have done it on some '72 shows in America. They had dropped Tangerine from the acoustic set by this point, which is kind of a tragedy because I thought that one was great. Acoustic, like the Japan shows they used to do, and some of the '72 shows they would do. But believe it or not, on Bron-yr-aur Stomp, the earlier ones on previous tours, Bonzo sang the harmony vocals, and you can hear him in a little bit of it. On the DVD, the Earl's Chord DVD, that Bonzo's singing the harmony with Plant, and sang it not only capably but really well. On this tour, Jimmy's doing it, and Jimmy, as he is the first to remind you, is not a singer, and I guess the less said about that, the better. But he took one for the team, so I'll give him credit for that. And I don't know why Bonzo didn't want to do it. Maybe at that point, I don't know, just couldn't be bothered to do it. He was too out of it. I don't know. It's a shame. But Jimmy does take a nice solo in this one, which, it being '77, might surprise you, but he does a lengthy acoustic improvisation in an open G, and it's actually not bad. So again, here the rhythm of the set list is apparent, because they go from the acoustic set into Jimmy doing White Summer, Black Mountainside. Some of these go on for too long. This one just about tests my patience, but it's a good one. In '80 they went on even longer than this, but it's not bad. He was in that Dadgad tuning. They hadn't really done this, I don't think, since 1970. But given that it's in the same tuning as Kashmir, it really made sense to do White Summer, Black Mountainside, and then have that boom, big explosion for the opening of Kashmir. And you could just imagine when you hear that, you know, the lights going up and then the flash pods, all that stuff. And it must have been a great moment to witness that in '77. Some of the versions of Kashmir are a little bit lumbering, and they occasionally would get lost in sections of it. And if you listen to 623, '77, or Zurich, 1980, I think that was 629, 80. If you listen to Kashmir from those shows, and those aren't the only two examples, but those are two good ones, they get lost in the middle. And this one is this one's good. The one on the 23rd at the LA Forum is a little bit of an embarrassment, because that's sort of the worst screw up you'll ever hear at a Zeppelin gig. But this one's good. Nice and tight. Doesn't have the usual screw ups in it. So I kind of like it. I think the end kind of goes on. The whole tune, the live Kashmir, probably goes on a minute too long, but that's a minor criticism. So we're kind of after Kashmir. We're at the end of the second act. You got that first hour, then you have this second block, and then we're kind of into the home stretch. So there's some sort of oldies that they got to take care of. So we go into Bonzo's drum solo, and this one probably has the all-time great Plant intro, who's just kind of stalling for time. Maybe they were replacing a snare drum or something. But Plant goes on for a few minutes, introducing Bonzo, and they call this one Over the Top, so it's, I guess, technically not Moby Dick, but it is Moby Dick. They start with Out on the Tiles intro into the Moby Dick thing, which must have been another spectacular visual. Listening to it on a bootleg, I have trouble getting through it. In fact, I don't think I've ever gotten through one of these live ones, especially from '77 when they go on for half an hour. But it would have been cool to see it as a visual. Then we're into Heartbreaker, which is a little bit of a surprise because they didn't do it a ton, in only a handful of times in '77. I think New York was one of the other ones, a handful of times. But this one's good, even by standards of other tours. I like this one. Jimmy's tone is really good. He's fairly tight. His solo section in the middle is a little bit longer than he usually does. He threw in some nice little bits and pieces that you don't hear every time. So I kind of like it. Plant was really good in it on this one. Sounded pretty strong. Didn't have a lot of cracks or anything like that. So it's pretty good, and it sounds a little bit spontaneous. Because someone is throughout the show is screaming for Heartbreaker, and it almost sounds like, okay, we'll do Heartbreaker. It kind of has that feel to it if you listen to the audience screams and everything throughout the show. But a good one. I'm really fond of this version of Heartbreaker, to tell you the truth. Then we're into Achilles, another one that I always thought worked well on stage. Another surprising one, given all the overdubs, and it sounds like 10,000 guitars on the studio version, but. This is another strong version. I think most of them that I've heard live, even some of the 1980 ones, the one in Frankfurt, 1980 is another favorite of mine. But this is a good one. He does before they get into Achilles, he does that violin bow segment, because they weren't doing Dazed and Confused anymore. Frankly, I don't think Jimmy was up to it at that point. But that's another one where it kind of tests your patience a little bit if you're listening to it. If you were watching it, it must have been the greatest thing, and you probably would have wanted it to go on for another hour, But it's a little bit taxing to hear it. But, with the cool sound, today you can, any of us can buy a little effect or module to get those same effects that Jimmy was getting. But it must have been mind-blowing at the time to hear some of the things he was doing. And the laser pyramid and all that other stuff. Must have been cool. He does a little bit of Star Spangled Banner in it. I think he does I Wish I Were in Dixie in there too. I think there's also America from West Side Story might be in there. So kind of threw in everything and the kitchen sink. So kind of cool, but one to listen to once and probably not come back to again. Then you're into Achilles. And that's kind of the end of the set proper. So they're coming back, because they haven't done Stairway yet, and they haven't done a whole lot of Love. So they're going to come back, and of course they did. So then you get into Stairway, which sounds by '77 a little bit tired, and how could it not be? It'd be hard to give that new life after having played it 10 zillion times by then. But as these things go, this one's not bad. Again, that was one where Jimmy soloing on any given night could be a revelation. Or it could just be, man, this guy has just run out of ideas, This one actually leans more toward the Revelation side. I like this one. And so it does show that they were still capable, even in '75, and when they were in a little bit rough shape by that point. They could still rise, you know, and give something heartfelt. Then you go to Whole Lotta Love, which really is just a little bit of an extended intro into rock and roll. It's interesting to hear this as the encore and set closer, as opposed to, you know, the previous tour. It was the set opener just 2 years earlier. So now they're sticking it at the tail end. And believe it or not, Plant sounds pretty good. He's not doing the high parts that he used to do earlier, but on this one, I think he's figured out, like I said earlier, he figured out how to use his voice the right way without straining. And his voice just sounds really strong throughout. And given that they've just done 3 hours, and they're doing rock and roll as the last number of the night, you give him credit for having the guts to do it. So he could still, you know, sing strongly after 3 hours. During a week of shows, you know, they only had a couple of nights off in LA. So it is impressive to hear it. So that is, listen to this, Eddie, in my estimation, one of the great bootlegs from any band, and proof that even in their sloppier period, they were still capable of this. You know, still could blow your mind. And you just listen to that, and you're like, you know, nobody walked out of that LA Forum disappointed after that show. And so fortunate, you know, that Mike Millard was there at the front lines to record these things for us. Just wish that that in this age of the internet, you know, Mike Millard would have a whole website, and he'd be a real popular guy today, adored by many of us, even though he's gone. So if you're looking for one starting point for live Zeppelin, and you want a pretty good set list that gives you a taste of electric and acoustic and everything they were doing up to '77, this is a pretty good starting point. Like I said, you can download one track at a time from shows on YouTube, or entire shows themselves, just without a break, just a 3-hour video. There's a lot of different ways to download them for free, or if you want to actually buy the CDs or something, you can get those on eBay and on Amazon. They don't really police that stuff like they used to anymore. So anyway, that is today's lesson on live Zeppelin, and a little bit of a taste of the '77 tour. So maybe if this turns out to be a good dialogue or something, we'll do a few more of these where we're talk about some live music. Good luck. Bye.